Welcome to the 15th episode of The Save File. I am your host, Glauber Costa. For decades, I was an atheist because that is, after all, what smart people do. In my late 30s, entirely through rational means, I became a Christian following my conclusion that people who die tend to stay dead, with one exception throughout history. The Save File is where I have conversations with other rational-minded people about their faith. My guest today is Adon Irani. We had a great conversation about his upbringing in a mixed home with a Zoroastrian father and a Baptist mother, how at age 11 he dedicated his life to Christ but completely forgot about it, and the important role that faith plays in his life. Adon, welcome.
Welcome, everyone.
How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well today, Glauber. Nice to see you.
I love chatting with other Canadians, and I recently found out, first of all, about you, about your existence, and you're in Toronto, so you're pretty close to me.
And with the train, it's very convenient.
Yeah. Oh, as I was telling you on the pre-show, I will be in Toronto tomorrow and also on Friday, so we should meet. I lived in Toronto for a long time, and then I moved here with COVID. So I am assuming you're by yourself. You don't have a family, right?
Well, I'm married.
You're married. Do you have kids?
Yeah, no kids though.
Yeah. The daycare in Toronto was $2,000 a month when I was there. And then
insane.
I moved to London. First of all, there's less need for that because, just the way you can structure your life. But we ended up using daycare anyhow. But it was less. It was $800 when I moved, right? It's more now, but I bet it's more in Toronto as well. So the huge difference. So for the family, it's just so much better.
And it's beautiful out there, I hear. It's a nice.
It is beautiful.
I mean,
it's beautiful.
Ontario's got a lot of great places.
The winter is very brutal, though. Are you born in Canada or you came here later?
I am.
Okay.
But compared to other places in Canada, I think we get off decent. Like the last few summers in Toronto were fairly mild. But it's compared to elsewhere in the world, it's a wallop. But I was born
the summers or the winters, the last winter.
Winters.
Yeah,
like the winters have been quite mild. I found lately.
Last year it was. Last year it definitely was.
Yeah.
Global warming, I guess. I don't know.
I don't know.
Awesome, sir. I am so glad to have the opportunity to get to know you. Let's start with a loaded question. What is your favorite database and why is it Turso?
It's a fair question, although it is a loaded one.
It doesn't have to be Turso, by the way. I'm just joking.
Well, you jumped in too quick because I was going to say it's going to be an honest answer though, and it is Turso. And I've been really impressed with. I'll skip all the backstory, but just what it's enabled me to do with not like very sparse code. And I had been building a SaaS that, for a variety of reasons, I'd kind of decoupled off of Drupal, which, again, there's a lot of pros to that. But for what I needed, I just kind of needed a database. And I could, so I basically ported my whole schema from Drupal into Turso, and it's transformed. Now, with huge, credit to Astro, but together, Turso and Astro, it's just completely transformed how I can make my app perform. And I've been really impressed. Like it's kind of opened my thinking in terms of how to prioritize the roadmap for what I want to do next. So things like the embedded replicas, I've got some big ideas for. So it's been exciting to see how, just basic SQL can be delivered in such a optimal way at the edge, and just with a few lines of code, link it into my app, and boom, I've got, I just spent so many weeks seriously thinking about architecture and how am I going to distribute my app and all this kind of stuff. It's just taken care of now that I'm with Turso. So honest answer, truly appreciate the tech.
So glad to hear that, man. I've got Turso jacket. It's just I'm using this mirrored version on the camera, so my instinct is always to pat in here, but it's here. So I've got my torso jacket. I should try to get you one. We don't have any.
Oh,
We need to make more, but like you deserve one.
I love that.
Awesome. For how long have you been in tech?
Well, really, my life. I don't know how far back you want to go, but I got a Vic. My brother got a Vic 20 when I was 7, and I just take those compute magazines and put in that 3K cartridge so I'd have enough compute memory to play sound or whatever else it unlocked. And then I just kind of had a love of programming, really from an early age. And from there, like ANSI graphics, like the draw and all this kind of stuff where you could
Mm-hmm.
automate and just have like sequences and I just being able to take like a knowledge of some kind of a data schema and just create art and experiences with it. It just kind of opened up a whole world for me. It was really cool.
Yeah, no, like just the computers were very different back then, and like PHP is having a resurgence then, right? Because like now everybody's talking about PHP. Laravel just raised their $57 million Series
Huge.
A. I've been at Laracon last week, and man, I would tell you there were 1,000 people at that conference, and like 1,000 engaged people. Very impressive
Huge.
things. That was the first language that I used. That was not I started in university, and then I learned Pascal because that was what they were teaching. And I bet
Hmm.
the kids this day won't even know what Pascal is. So Pascal is essentially a language that was designed to be taught, right? Just the idea is like something easy to teach in
Hmm.
comparison with the languages at the time, like C. And then I ended up coding in C because of my interest in the Linux kernel. But in the beginning, when I was just learning, I picked up PHP to write a couple of websites and stuff like that. That was 2001, right?
Similar.
So
Yeah, I had a
think about it,
timeline
like
like that.
23 years ago, I've done PHP, and
Incredible.
PHP is still there, having a resurgence. And I've been told completely different thing than it is today, right?
I started in it must have been 2001, maybe 2000. No, it was before then. Um, and I picked up. I wanted to get back into programming, so I picked up a book on Perl, thinking, "Oh, this is the way I'll do it." And I had a friend at the time. I went to visit him. He's in computer science. I wasn't. We're in university, and he was doing his homework, and he's trying to figure it out. And I just look at him like, "Oh, well, that's your problem there. Like you're missing a semicolon or something." He's like, "Oh, what language is this?" And it was PHP. So like that kind of drew my attention to like I can do that and create web apps with it. Like it was just really again just kind of unlocked all this potential in my thinking. And I built a internet radio station with a friend. I lived in Barrie, so just an
Mm-hmm.
hour north of here, and that was my hometown. And in our I don't know early 20s, I guess we had a community radio station. My friend, like he was the cool guy. He was a DJ and knew people and had this kind of like a vinyl record shop and then the studio. So we'd do a live to air streaming from there. And I just used Linux and Icecast and PHP and just bash spliced it all together. And for a couple of years, like this was before YouTube, before any of that,
Yeah.
we were live to air. It's really cool. I just love what's possible with it was such simple tech at the time.
I had many friends. I have many friend groups over the years, especially in university and etc., where we had a cool person in the group, but it was never me. Just there's always somebody else who's the cool person that bringing the coolness. And what is your company doing today? You have At Risk Media. I
Hmm.
understand that is your business.
Yeah. So for the longest time, I had a kind of full time career. And then on the side, I like it goes back far. So I'll skip all the backstory, but basically, I'd create websites and different projects for community groups and, artist friends and things like this. But I would seem to care more about the projects than, not in all cases, but in many cases, it's like I'm paying for servers, I'm doing all this. So over 10 years ago now, I thought, okay, I'm going to set up a agency and I'll be able to expense my servers and take on clients. So I had for the longest time now, alongside full-time work, had a small agency where I did web development and just basic stuff. But on the on the side of that side, I was also
Yeah.
developing tech that I kind of had a vision for from my all my different experiences. I just had an idea of something, a problem I wanted to solve. So the track stack, which is the SaaS that I'm building, is kind of that. So at-risk media will evolve into, I'm thinking, without even describing what the SaaS is, just I could say to the listeners, think of it as like a Wix kind of a competitor where it helps you build websites, but there's some extra features there that make it really appealing to certain niches. So there's a whole story you can go into there, but that as a service. So just like you could have like a WordPress as a service kind of agency, I'll have a track stack as a service. Expand my at-risk media into that, and there's all kinds of growth roadmaps from there. But it's kind of just a transition now to get the tech itself to a point where I can. I've basically got a brand new demo that I'm going to be releasing and really kind of promoting hard in the next weeks. Kind of very soon. So I'm kind of in an early stage now, but I'm really excited of kind of where this is going to go. But I'll just kind of pause there because it's
No,
a
wish you
rambling
the
answer.
best. It's what you're describing is like people have side projects, and your side projects have side projects. Is that like a two level kind of thing? Side projects are great, man, because it's so much in business is just about proving that the idea is even worth pursuing, right? And this allows you. I think people overestimate the amount of effort that you need to prove that an idea is worth pursuing. It's not that much, and doing it as a side project allows you to do it, right? And then if it is worth pursuing, then you can pursue it. That's awesome. And so you were born in Barrie, if I got you correctly, because that's your
Yes.
hometown. Grew up, or at least grew up in Barrie. Now let's get you to the personal stuff. Were you raised in a religious family?
No. My father's background, like his mother, is very devout, but he's Zoroastrian, so that's a whole other.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And then my mother wasn't religious, but her, I guess, extended family, I guess, were more Baptists, and she's of Irish descent, 4 generations removed, but Canadian. So I've got my mom's the white lady, Irish heritage, 4 generations removed, and then my father's this pure Irani Parsi, but he's born in Mumbai,
Okay.
and the background there is my last name's Irani, and of the Zoroastrians, like many of them have been persecuted, or this is going back to ancient times, really, like the Median Empire. So in the 7th century, whenever it was, some stuff happened. You had a whole kind of like that whole region became an Islamic empire, and continues to this day. So the ancestry that my father's of, his grandparents were in Iran up until like the late 1900s. So there's a lot of Zoroastrians, not a lot, but there's different kind of lineages of the Zoroastrians. So my father's this kind of Irani Zoroastrian that his great grandparents had migrated to India, to Mumbai, and um, and then he kind of just left it all behind, moved to Canada, married a white lady,
Yeah.
and just he had his own kind of ideas about what kind of life he wanted to live. Um, so that's what brought him to the
Must not
70s.
have
And
been must not have been easy on him and on his family. Like I have a very good friend of mine. His name is Zane. If he's listening, uh, probably not listening live for sure. But like in fact, I met him in Toronto. But he also got married to a lady, a non-Zoroastrian lady, and moved to Switzerland. So they live in Switzerland now. But also he came from a Zoroastrian background, and I
Hmm.
understand that the families, because Zoroastrianism is a very small religion because you only marry
Yeah,
within the group.
you can't
You
convert.
correct me if I'm wrong, right?
No, it's
So you cannot
that's
convert.
the thing.
Yeah, you cannot convert. You only marry within the group. So like it's not like it's gonna grow. It's just this thing, and so he always faced a lot of pressure. And he would tell me, like I'm curious to see if you had the same experience, but he would tell me that it was something like, look, for my parents is like at this point is more of a cultural thing. Like they say those prayers, they do those things, but like if you go inquire them, it's not like they really
Hmm.
understand the mythology
Doctrine,
even
or
or
yeah,
whatever the
yeah.
doctrine or it's just like it's a cultural identity. And this friend of mine actually he came from Pakistan, so it's likely a similar group that moved to India, Pakistan, and
Hmm.
where your father came from, right?
Hmm.
Did you grow up exposed to Zoroastrianism? And
So it's an interesting, I guess, I don't know, a whole kind of set of responses potentially. So I wasn't really aware, like my family, like I knew I kind of looked different from the kids at school, like, but I also sort of like culturally I completely fit in. Um, so that whole home life was like I had kind of a broken and difficult home
Mhm.
life, which then maybe exacerbated some of this kind of stuff, like around identity and that kind of thing. So for me, the on my father's side, that kind of connection to this ancient history was something that I was really drawn to, but without any way to pursue it. So I was, I had maybe books or the different things like this. Um, but it wasn't until I got a little older that I was maybe in a position to really pursue it. So at one point I was thinking, I'd like to go to India, like maybe in the summers, and there's school that you go to in a sense. Um, if you're Israeli, you'd have the bar mitzvah when you're younger,
Mhm.
and with the Zoroastrians, you have a navjoth, which is a ceremony of sorts. Like my cousin had his,
It's
and
a like coming of age ceremony.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was something that at a very, maybe 13 or something like that, I just wasn't aware enough or really tuned in enough to pursue that. And then combine that with me being in Canada and with a broken family and my dad kind of estranged from all that. It wasn't an active part in any way of my identity. But then as I grew older and really was searching for who I am and all that kind of stuff, um, that kind of messed with my mind a bit, because it's this kind of, very small, like, very limited number of people that have that experience. Uh, and it has such an interesting place in world history, like
Well, in fact, correct me if I'm wrong again, but the modern concept that Christians have of heaven and hell, very heavily inspired by Zoroastrianism, where
Mhm.
it was the first religion to have this idea of like a duality
Yeah,
of good and evil. So a lot of the things
yeah,
that we still talk about, right?
yeah, it's incredible. So that was a big, just, I guess, affected me in terms of um, not being connected to the people where I could kind of really pursue that knowledge, and at a time when you didn't have the internet and so forth. Um, so that kind of manifests in different ways. Like I'm tattooed all over, and that was a big part of the art that I used in my tattoos. And so I've explored it in different ways, but all before coming to saving faith in Jesus, which again, um,
We'll get there, but like
really, yeah, we'll get there. Like,
I'm super curious, and I want to keep exploring this because not only like my favorite person in the world, although he's dead, well, not counting Jesus, of course, but like my favorite artist. Let's just clarify like that. My favorite artist in the world ever is or was Zoroastrian, and I'm pretty sure you know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I was at his
Yeah,
the colony where he lived. My
yeah.
uncle's like, oh, that's Freddie Mercury's place, and
That's
I was
exactly,
like
yeah, yeah.
12 at the time or something.
The island of Zanzibar, where he was from, and I tend to get obsessed with things that I like. For like the way I do this is like I find out something that I like, and then I get really obsessed about it.
Hmm.
For 3 4 months, I do nothing else, and then I know all there is to know about it. So I had this with Freddie when I was 20. So I knew every single thing about Freddie,
It's incredible.
and so I learned a lot about Zoroastrianism because of that. And so I I'm not like that anymore with Freddie. I'm with like that with other things. But obviously, like it's not that I don't like it anymore. It's not that it's just the way my mind works. I have the spirit of
Hmm.
obsession, and then for months that's all like I can think of. And after that, like I learned that they still have a great place in my heart. But I guess I move on to either neutral or to the next thing. But super, super, super interesting. When you were growing up, did you identify yourself like I'm this thing, or were you just like a
Hmm.
secular person? This period of you growing up, like what was religiously speaking? Did you believe in anything? Did you see any identity, or was it really just a mix of things?
Hmm. So there's a lot of not having those kind of influences or those thoughts, I would say. And it was really, I think in my early 20s when I went first away to university for my undergrad. And I was living in residence or, in different apartments. And that's, I think, really when I started to kind of explore, how I identify. And um, I would wear like Indian kurtas and like just different kind of ethnic stuff that I kind of was really, I guess, just trying to discover my own style. And, you know, I really like the goth kind of folks. Like I was
Yeah.
really close to that, but that's just not how I would present myself. Um, and then I had like some artist friends, but they're always too cool. And then I just, it's kind of like I just really had an awkward youth. And then in those early university years, um, just you were kind of living and interacting with people and kind of expressing, I was expressing myself in different ways. So that's, I think, where I really kind of almost, I'd say, more just got confused. Like what,
Mm-hmm.
um, like it's just, it's one thing to delve into a cultural, set of doctrines or, religious set of doctrines and have mentors around you and kind of explore it in a, one what you might call a healthy way. Um, but then I think there's also just what we can do to ourselves when we're,
Alone.
not comfortable in our own
Yeah.
skins and just trying to figure out who we are. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
scramble in a real way.
Yeah, but there is the cultural aspect. But if I had a time machine, first of all, if I had a time machine, I don't think I would use it this way. I thought a lot about like what are the things I would do with a time
You
machine.
really do
So
the obsession part, eh?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like just there's so many things I would do with a time machine. But like assuming that I had a time machine and I could go back in time and ask your 16-year-old self the usual questions like, do you believe in God? Who do you think God is?
Hmm.
And what religion what would you have responded as like this mixture between
Hmm.
Zoroastrianism, Baptism,
Yeah,
and
I
then in
don't
Canada, you
I don't honestly know.
yeah.
Um, I've always had a strong appreciation of nature and sort of natural, like a like an evolutionary. Now that I know more about evolution, I'd say it's incomplete, but that kind of book of nature kind of understanding of the world, that's very appealing to me. And in many ways, it's
Mm-hmm.
still what I think. Like there's so many great, um, like I think of people like Hugh Ross, like the astrophysicist Christian, that just
Mm-hmm.
has such a deep understanding of astrophysics and just explains how it's further evidence of just glory in the Lord and creation. And so that, is really appealing to me. But I think I was more on a, like a spiritual or supernatural, um, like not so much understanding physical forces, but just the, like I don't even know at 16, but for a long time into my 20s, I was really struck with just how um, alone or just out of place I felt, and looking at society and then reading out of it that that's kind of a symptom of the type of world that we're living in, and then getting into university, getting into like critical theory and things like this. Like there's a lot to kind of feed that thinking.
And what did you go to university for? Just
The Initially it was a undergraduate in business. I did an honors um, degree in business administration, and then I did a master's in environmental studies, which is kind of more like a social political thought,
mhm.
but without any clear sense of how that connects to a career or what it even means
Yeah.
to be a person with a career. Like I was just really oblivious.
There's so many. It's funny because there is this idea that like you go to university to have a career. Uh, if there is one notion that I can disavow in my kids, that will be this one, and and not that going to college is not important, but we see so many people that go to university to do one thing and end up with completely different careers. Like we have many
Mm-hmm.
people in tech that are major in philosophy
Yeah,
and other
yeah.
things that are completely unrelated. So I think that just there is a place for university to hone in your critical thinking and but later do with it as you please, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
although this is advice that I do not follow when but we'll see.
That's why it's good
There's
advice, right? it's,
there's
it's battle tested.
battle test. Exactly. It's just and
Yeah.
it's super interesting because you're telling me like do you have this approach like book of nature. I'm very familiar with Phil Ross, by the way, as well, and
Yeah,
and,
he's so
and
good.
there's a bunch of stuff that he says that I'm a fan of. um but look, it's the story I told when I started this podcast. I became an atheist at a tender age because that's what smart people do, right? And I think we grew up, from what I can tell here, we grew up more or less at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
We both know what Pearl is. I think a lot of our audience that was born like and started recently in the ecosystem don't even know what that is, and good for them, by the way. And at the time, the influence was very strong. Like people like Richard Dawkins and the New Atheists, and the idea that religion is a cancer on society. It could go as far as that, and
Mm-hmm.
honestly, it would. And still, I mean, you still have that movement present today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why did that not infect you? Like, what was as a rational person that was so enamored with the Book of Nature? Why did this
Mm-hmm.
bug not get to you?
Well, I mean, it could be Holy Spirit. I like to give him a lot of credit. Um, it's like the life's this crazy crooked path that
Mm-hmm.
somehow I ended up, kind of pointing in the right direction here. So I believe, and I think a lot of it was, um, I think the most honest answer is just a brokenness. Like I just really had struggles in my youth. Um, like just my family was just not a place where love was, it felt like. And that's, I think in some ways a really unfair um, characterize. It's an accurate one, but it's unfair because it completely contrasts with what I think my mother would feel, and in fact her actions. Like when I was the tiny baby, like I know, like she's very loving, but just the between my father was just such an incredible, like how he loved was, and sometimes problematic, but um, his heart was very pure in so many ways. So with both parents, though, um, they did not get along in such a fundamental way that it just created such a chaos that got released into our home, in such unpredictable, like just like a nasty just level of hurt, and all these kind of really negative emotions were just
Mm-hmm.
constantly present, and that weighed incredibly hard on everyone in the home. So I think a lot of when I was getting into university and just trying to figure out what to do with my life, there was such that brokenness there that I wasn't reflecting on, like I wasn't modeling the question in a way that a healthy person would. So I think I just kind of got batted around. And because I'm a very smart person, like smart and I can be very stupid in some ways, but I'm very intelligent, and intuitive. So I've found myself sliding into roles that where I could produce value and be really useful. So I think a lot of it shifted into this misunderstandings of what service is, and just how to be helpful, and not like, I can see that in a super unhealthy way where it's like, codependent and things like that. Like I don't think I went to that extent, but just a lot of how I approached life. I think it wasn't in this, I don't know, like I remember, I'd hang out at a bar or wherever and have conversations with people, but to me it was more the social philosophy and less like, maybe I just wasn't as aware in like on the psychology side, but I don't remember having a lot of conversations around religion. And maybe it was partly this sort of arrogance of, um, well, we're framing it as critical theory, or so it's like this haughty kind of, where religion would be such a low, on that kind of scale, because of all this new atheist thinking that really pigeonholed it in a way where it's just easily dismissed. Like I think I felt more of a like, what do I need? Like I'll summarize with this: when I did finally kind of come to a saving faith, there's two moments where I could come to, but the main one here is I was 30 or so, and I had a neighbor, and she asked me, like, she's a heavy, evangelical Christian, wonderful woman, crazy, like I mean, perceived that way, and I think she was sort of almost, interrogating my heart about like, oh, well, have I even read the Bible? And I was like this, like, lady, I got more letters after my name than in my name. Like I've got all these degrees. Like, I devour social theory and explain it back to you in context. Like, no, I haven't read it, but okay, well, so something in me has thought, oh, I should go get this, and I'll just kind of quiet her down, or just have something to say back to her. Although there was no malice in what she was like, she was all loving towards me. But I bought a Bible and I started to read it, and it was just this insane experience where it's like I'd never encountered, like the experience of reading it was unlike any other reading experience I had had, where my heart was being spoken to in ways that like I could perceive. And then that leads on to a whole other thing that, we can get into, but just that, I don't know, this new atheism and just that kind of way of thinking, it just never really settled on me, but I think it was ever pervasive in, around in the ways of, I don't know.
There are two things from what you're saying that kind of speak to me, and the first of them is that you don't say it, but I grasp from it that something similar with my upbringing. When you say things like my father had a different, have his way of loving, right? And I think this is code word for something, because I had the same experience. My father would tell me sometimes, like he will be put in situations where like just I don't know, like sometimes you will point blank ask him, "Do you love me?" And then instead of saying yes or no, he would explain a bunch of stuff, right? Just
Oh.
and how love is, and etc. And like how he's there for the family, and so I don't think I grew up with a very affectionate father, which seems to be
Mhm.
like a similar experience to what you're, but a father that was present for the family, at least in the things that matter. Nevertheless, and a father that made great sacrifices
Mhm.
for the family, right? To the extent that I think he was unable to even say it, like I love
Mhm.
versus I don't love. He will
Mhm.
go into those tirades about like just I'm different, and so and this imprinted a bunch of stuff in me as well. You seem to have had a similar experience with that. And
I
and
think
the
an
second thing
impact
is that it's
maybe.
funny
Yeah.
because I grew up in a religious, outwardly religious environment in which I think people were not religious as I would describe them today, but they had a belief in God that was present, and
Hmm.
it was weird in many ways. But there was this idea that like there is this thing called God. He is important, and if you ask them what are you, they would have said Catholics. But if you start asking what they believe in, they would have told you like a bunch of things that are the complete opposite of what any Catholic would believe. So it's a very messy situation.
Hmm.
But I still had this thing that I would call religion. Uh, and then when the new atheists came along, I had this thing to battle that against, right? Right. So this is the
Hmm.
edifice, and it seems like you didn't have that, right? So you come
Yeah.
with all
Yeah.
this
Exactly.
you come with all this ammunition about like why atheism is true, why religion is bad, and you don't have that thing in front of you to use this gun against. So right
Hmm.
there's nothing there. There's just is that a fair assessment? Like a
Yeah. It's an interesting one. I'd say it's
hmm?
astute.
I should open a practice, a clinical practice. Just- no, super cool, man. And then it had nothing to deconstruct using modern terminology, right? You did not have
Hmm.
this thing to deconstruct. And then you are around 30. You say you read the Bible, and that spoke to you. What
Hmm.
was the thing that spoke to you the most?
It was more. Well, now I would describe it as. Um, well, let me say it this way. Um, in terms of just kind of really positioning, who's having that experience. I think an interesting way to put it is we're spirit. We have a soul and we live in a body, but we're spirit. And I had always felt that, but I didn't really have any language to really engage or understand it. And then when I'm reading, especially in the New Testament, and I 15 years later now, I won't be able to recollect like specific kind
Yep.
of things, but it was just like my heart would just like there'd be things like I'm almost feeling it now, where it was like something like a deep hurt that happened in my life, maybe connected to my father, and then I read this passage that just kind of unlocks this key, and then I'm able to like not feel that pain anymore or something like that, and I'm just kind of somewhat conscious of how it's like there's this kind of reshuffling of my, not just my thoughts, but like how. Have you ever seen that kind of Plinko game in The Price is Right, where you drop your chip in and it bounces and then it ends up in, oh, you get
Yeah.
$50? It was
Yeah.
kind of like I felt my life was this, where I was like kind of like bouncing through hurts and situations, and then so in reading the New Testament, reading the Gospel, and like having that kind of cover me, um, and really kind of in a way that wasn't a head understanding, it was more of a heart thing. I think I was finally having moments where I could kind of see, like kind of put a telescope on where I'm at and why, things are a certain way. And it kind of, I think, comes back to this kind of free will of like, I am a, very specific, unique kind of individual. And for me to be everything, with all the giftings he's put in me, and to be this kind of person that he sees me as, um, I went through all these experiences, and to kind of just almost kind of be able to break out of that bondage for, even if it's just a split second, and to kind of see myself in this more eternal light. It just gave me this meaning and this identity that, I it took a while to really kind of register, and for me to grow into it, but it was this kind of tangible. reckoning. Like I really felt something that summer, and I read the whole Bible like that. I just spent the whole summer and read it like it was, something was happening there. It was really interesting.
Did you ever, because you mentioned that, you had your neighbor and your neighbor pushing you in that direction, and the way you describe it, it seems like you were not at first open to that, because you're saying like,
No,
I
no.
have those letters after my name, which I read this as I'm not interested in this crap, right? Just that this is below me, and
Well, just more, it was like, oh, I'm sure there's some great lessons in there, but let me index them and annotate them and, move on with it. Like it was just like, it wasn't, I don't think I was being, I mean, it was certainly dismissive and arrogant, but it wasn't um, with a malice against the religion in a sense. Cause I just didn't, as you say, I didn't have that kind of response to it,
mm-hmm.
but it was more of that's just another, and maybe this is the new atheist kind of thinking, like this kind of, mimetic kind of way of looking at the world that, you know, I didn't really know much about, but I didn't elevate it to see it as, um, greater than other knowledges that I had, explored. I just kind of saw it as, one of many knowledge systems, I guess. That's kind of how I would characterize it in my thinking.
One of many, but still worth something, instead of like one of many and like completely worthless, which is what I would
Well,
expect, by the way, right?
but because of this woman, like, and this is something
Yeah,
for me, it's always relational. Like I just had
yeah.
um, respect's probably the right word for it. Like there's just a genuineness to her. And that always kind of caught my attention when someone, I mean, I've also dealt with a lot of fake people and not realized it at the time. I've been hurt badly by that. But,
Mm-hmm.
um, in certain interactions where it's just like, there's something about that person that just resonates with my heart. That's um, like in a Bayesian probability sense, like I put a lot of weight on that.
Mm-hmm. That's super. You know that the other day I saw this on Twitter. The four big religions, right? Just that there are four big religions in the world, and the way you do this is that if you type on Google how to convert, the autocomplete will tell you how to convert to Christianity, how to convert to Islam, how to convert to Judaism, and how to convert to PDF. So PDF is apparently
That's crazy.
the fourth largest religion in the world. So like but your
That's
that's not what your
hilarious.
neighbor that's not what your neighbor was. But as you're reading this, as you're going through the text, do you feel any resistance in the sense that, look, this thing is resonating with me, but on the other hand, my rational mind is telling me
Mhm.
something different, and I'm resisting this somehow?
No, because I was at such a place of brokenness that I just, um, like something needed to change, and I was ready for change, and I was looking for change in all the wrong places. But also, I got connected with a decent church in town, and then through that, I mean, just being in a place where I feel love, that was something. But then it got into, it was all new to me. And here's this
Mm-hmm.
teaching pastor that has this passion and this heart and, Holy Spirit, anointing that, again, I didn't realize what that was at the time, but for him then to, exfoliate what's in the word, that really fed me. So I would then, especially for those early years, I'd really spend like that was more of a head knowledge, but it was also, there's a head and a heart aspect to it. But I really leaned in. So in a sense, the supports that I needed were around me through that time period, which allowed my focus to really remain on, understanding more of what the gospel is, and what the word of God says.
Do you think it's a fair assessment to say that sometimes, or in many times, definitely not all times, religion speaks a lot to broken people?
Well, I think it does, but I would also say we're all broken. Like, it's just that there's some people that have accepted certain lies that prevent them from really kind of seeing that brokenness, like the going back to, okay, we have a fallen nature, like we're all broken. So how that manifests in each of us is going to be different, and I think some will be kind of absorbed into, just like the circles of hell. It's like, in real life, you've got these kind of places that just kind of absorb you, and some people spend decades, in some lifestyle or some, like, by that, I'm not meaning anything specific, but just like like I think of myself where it's like decades pass before I really kind of realized the direction that I, wanted to be going in. Like, I just kind of,
Mm-hmm.
things happen to us. So I don't know if I'm thinking of it in a similar way as you, or just,
Yeah, I
kind of
think that just in a broader sense, I think we're all
mm-hmm,
broken.
mm-hmm,
But on a stricter sense, then some people are definitely so much more broken than others. That not in a permanent way, but like in parts of your life at least. That in which it's fair to classify as, let's call those people broken and let's call those people not broken. And I
mm-hmm,
see this in society as well, because when you look at history, and when you look at starting with my favorite part of history, which is the Roman Empire. The initial the Roman Republic was a very religious place, right? Just that they were not Christians, of course. That they could not have possibly been Christian, because Jesus had not been born yet. But they were very religious, by any standards. And as Rome becomes wealthier, and they become a lot less religious, and they become a lot more given to hedonism and pleasure seeking, and etc. Then the empire becomes this extremely affluent empire, until it breaks apart, and at
mm-hmm,
that point Christianity takes it, the place. And the medieval society was an extremely religious society.
mm-hmm.
I think in part because society was completely broken. There was nothing there. I mean, after the fall of Rome, like, what's left? Like, essentially nothing. And as our society get richer and more affluent, right, and it almost feels like, yeah, I mean, everything is going great, so I don't need God.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
We
exactly.
are. I'm my own thing. But when everything is broken, then it becomes very obvious. Or to use a phrase from Warren Buffett, when the tide goes down, you see who's swimming naked. So you see just this idea that it happens in society, and it likely happens with people too, in the sense that people who's got their shit together. I'm not saying that they don't need religion, but they would think that
Mm-hmm.
they don't, right? Because you
Yeah.
start attributing everything to yourself, and the Bible has many examples of that exact thing happening with Israel from the beginning of times, or from the dawn of
Mm-hmm.
time. Is like, just I can do it, until you can't, and then you go back to your roots.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. So it's great that it wasn't what happened to me, by the way, but just but I see this in so many people. I see this in so many people in their stories of like when it's not people who grew up with religion.
Mm-hmm.
I think in 8 out of 10 cases, I kind of see what you're describing. I was in a broken place, and that took
Yeah.
me out of the broken place. How concerned were you as you're reading through this, if those things are true, in the sense that, like, the Bible is telling me those stories, and they're telling me those
Mm-hmm.
things that happen. Did those things really happen? Is this something that you had in mind?
No, and I don't. I want to give the most honest answer. I'm trying to imagine. I mean, now I just there's no doubt in me. But at that time, like, say, when I was 30, and hadn't been baptized, and was still exploring, I don't know that I perceived it as doubt. I would hear the pastors teach on different aspects of the gospel. And I think I just kind of was trying to, I couldn't really characterize the framing I would have at the time, because it's obvious, like it's, there's a degree of faith involved. And I'm just trying to remember, like the big things I'd said earlier about that kind of relational, like I just, something, when somebody, my heart feels a certain way being around a certain person, that speaks to me. But also things that are the most precise way I'd put it is, like I have a very keen sense of order and randomness. So when things are happening that are seemingly way too coincidental, or
Yes.
where there seems to be this pattern that defies probabilities, that just irks me. Like it catches my attention. And a lot of what was happening at this time, I would kind of characterize as that. And it's gone from my memory now in terms of giving specific examples. But I just remember there's that kind of, that just warm kind of hug around me, where just certain things would just be, I'd be really struggling over something. And then just randomly I'd turn on the radio, and the person was saying something that was just exactly aligned to, like it just, you couldn't have explained that through just, random, there's things sit on the radio all the time, and you just turn it at the right time and you're going to get the right message. Like it was just
The
strange.
explanation, I think the explanation that an atheist would give, which is again what I always gave as on my as my former self, is that uh, you have those, you're bombarded by signals all the time, so you're
Yes,
seeing
there's a
stuff that
confirmation bias for sure.
yeah, that you don't. I mean, yeah, I see something written here, I don't even register. But if I have something in my mind and then I see
Mm-hmm.
something that will stand out, right? But I don't know if this is, I don't know to which extent this is true, because like I definitely, and as I shared in the past in this show, I'm not a very experiential person. I'm a very rational person, and still am. And my coming to Christ was a completely rational process. But the same, the way I sometimes see that, hey, look, this seems to be a coincidence versus this seems to be something directed, is exactly like four or five things like that happening in, as if you're putting a puzzle together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I turn on the radio and then there's something there that's exactly what I'm feeling, and then I look out the window and I see exactly that, and
Yeah.
then and then something completely unrelated happened, and a person that I haven't seen in 10 years calls me with just, so you start seeing like, and now it's harder to explain as just your attention focusing on
Mm-hmm.
the right thing. Is dude, like if the probability of those five things happening in that order in perfect
Yeah.
fitting,
Minuscule. Yeah.
it's minuscule, right? Just interesting. It's interesting that you see this as well. But look, moving on. So you is is what you're saying, that because you had all that, you didn't have the need, or you didn't feel like asking those truth questions out of it, because
Well, I don't quite know how to respond, because I would say, if I take what I'm reading and anything in the gospel, and I compare that against what Genesis says, like I kind of just don't really have a concern. Like if God breathed this world into existence, which I believe he did, then things like, so a fun example is, um, like a new earth creationist, or creationist but through science, in a sense, like the earth could be the 6,000 years, it could be, the 14 billion. Um, so on those kind of questions, I care that there's a viable scientific explanation for things. Um, and I kind of take that as like, I like pragmatism in terms of just sort of a philosophy. Like it just, I would take plausible explanations, but maybe another good answer is because of my grandmother. Now she was Zoroastrian, and she lived in India. I only saw her a handful of times, but she had such a faith in her, and like that, I guess just and she'd pray and just and she just believed God for things. Like she always, God bless you. Like she just had this faith in her that I could kind of feel. So I kind of think I just had that faith when I was encountering these stories, and it just wasn't really a and the other side of it is I'm not a strong hard sciences, physics, and that kind of,
Yep.
like my knowledge is kind of more, not of the physical sciences. So again, like I didn't have enough knowledge to be like, oh, that doesn't make any sense, because I just, didn't have the credentials to come against
Yeah,
it.
but you don't need to go there. But before, like, there is one thing in particular that I always like to ask my guests. But before I go there, like, would you? I'm very curious on your view on that, because I met people who believe completely different things on that. Would you say that your grandmother is wrong in her faith, being
Oh, because
Zoroastrian?
she's Zoroastrian, wasn't Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one I think a lot about. And
Mm-hmm.
it's the Bible's very clear. The only way to get,
Yeah.
that Jesus is Dora, and I don't doubt that in any way. Um, I think in terms of like an eternal way, where and like in a covenants with people kind of way. So you look at the Old Testament and the covenants that Jehovah God Almighty had with the Israeli people, and then you look at in the New Testament, there's a new covenant. So when I think of like my grandmother, that her belief system comes from like 2000 and more years prior, I I feel there's room in God's love for, um, there's something with that covenant, and same with people outside the Christian faith. Like I see really devout, you know, say Muslim, and there's faith in them, and so
Mm-hmm.
I don't have, um, you know smart answers on this kind of stuff, but um, I don't worry about, oh, is my grandmother's soul, where is her soul? Like I don't, I guess I just trust God in
Mm-hmm.
that, which is, I think that's the most fair answer. But I also would say to anyone living, it does matter what you believe, and so there's a whole other conversation there. But when you're doing this kind of retrospective of, this person in my life, of, that thought this, where are they now? Um, yeah, with my grandmother, I don't know. I guess that's sort of
Yeah,
what I
like
feel.
yeah, the thing that I like to explore here is actually the other way around.
Oh,
So because I get that, and I've never met a person who said, what, just my grandmother was wrong and she's in hell right now for that. Like usually people go exactly on the path that you are. It would be very mean, although I'm sure certain people think that, but I never met. I think most people don't even think that, and if they do, nobody has ever told me that. It's usually something like this. I mean, just the the question is, like, you would acknowledge that you believe she's wrong, right? And even though in a loving
oh,
way, and you think that her faith is not
oh, but
correct.
maybe it's not complete,
Okay.
but it's that kind of, to me, it goes back more to that covenant. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're trusted with what we're exposed to. So for someone that grew up in that old world, um, that's between the Lord and her of what
Mm-hmm.
she felt. So um, yeah, I'd have trouble taking, it'd be easy just to take, a verse or scripture and just say, boom, apply here, you know,
Yeah.
easy cut, either way. Um, but in terms of wrong, like, again, is it head wrong or heart wrong? And where did she put her trust? Like, if,
Mm-hmm.
um, and if it was with God the Father, because she didn't know Jesus, like, it'd be something I'd enjoy doing more of a study on,
Yeah.
and really speaking with people about, because I don't have strong opinions there, like 100% of what the Word of God says, but I wonder there where, like, where does grace come in
Yeah.
with
But
that?
here's the real spicy question. If you will, I was just trying to get you to say no. Yeah, she's wrong in some way. So we don't know heart or head and etc. But given that you can have this faith and be at least incomplete, how do you know that we're right or
Mhm.
we're complete, right? So what is the thing that grounds you for you? Because as a rational person, one thing that I get asked a lot, and one thing that I asked a lot is, the usual. There are as many religions in this planet as there are countries, if not people, right?
Mhm.
How do you know you're right, right? So that's more about you than the grandmother is just a way to
Yeah,
get
no,
you
I see what
in.
you
So
did
we can,
there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think a biblical answer is fruit.
Mm-hmm.
That there's things that the New Testament would say about this. There's transformation. So I would see it in this kind of, um, like, I serve an invisible God. Like, I don't see him, um, but I hear him sometimes, and I feel his presence in my heart. So if what you're asking is, okay, well, those are just sensations, and they're ones that are, um, error prone, then I don't know that there's an easy conversation from that point, because
Mm-hmm.
the things that, like, what a neat way to put it might be, where if I know someone and I can trust them with just a little bit of knowledge or whatever, or maybe just a simple request, but they,
Mm-hmm.
um, come through. And then I can kind of trust them with a little bit more. And that builds into this kind of relationship where I feel I know a bit about their heart. Um, where does that knowledge reside? Like, it's not a mental model that I've just kind of indexed and broken down to some schema. Like, it's more complex than that. So for me, it's been this, from that kind of point of brokenness, and there's a whole story. Like, um, I actually gave my life to the Lord as an 11-year-old, but I didn't know what
Oh,
I was
really?
doing. And that, yeah.
No, no, no.
But
So let's put the true thing on pause because now I want to hear that. Yeah.
well, I was in such a broken home, and I had a best friend at the time, and we'd hang out like we're just regular boys, like, skateboard or do whatever, and you'd have sleepovers like that. Just, you'd hang out, you go there for lunches, like just all the normal stuff that kids would do at that age. And they were Christian. And I remember, um, a couple times where I was going to spend that night over, and then they had to ask my parents, well, okay, we'd be wonderful, but we go to church on Sundays. Can we bring Aiden with us? And that my parents are just fine with. So I don't know how many times, but a handful of times I would go with them, to Sunday service. And, like, I don't even have much recollection of the church at the time, but it was just that perception of, there's something different about this household. Like, there's love here. There's just these intangible things that I'm perceiving that are just missing from my home. And I guess, we were good friends, and we went to summer camp, and I must have known him for a couple of years. But over that course of time, the Lord was just kind of pouring into me in different ways. And again, I didn't really have any conception of much of that, but I just knew in my heart that there was something right about this family that was wrong about my family. So there's this trust that kind of was kind of in there, operated on this level of trust. So, and there was a Billy Graham crusade that had come to Barrie at the time, and I remember we went to that, and they called for this big, who wants to come up to the front and declare their salvation prayer. And I did that, and I remember their parents are all like happy. Oh my God! Aiden just went up with them, and I remember saying to them, "Oh, I get my heart." Like, I can't remember when, but so what had happened was I just had such enough knowledge that I needed Jesus, but I didn't. I still can't even remember what I thought about at the time, other than that there was something missing in my home, and I knew that, okay, I just had to make some kind of a declaration. Like, I had to speak to him and tell him what I felt. So there's this one evening, I'm pretty sure I was 11, and it was before my parents separated, but that was when I was 11, so it was right around that time. And I think my dad was on the other side, like he was outside on somewhere, and like nearby, but just outside. And then I just ran around the house, make sure no one was there. And then I kind of got on my knees in the kitchen and just kind of whatever I said declared my heart. But I didn't have any other Christian friends, and I kind of lost touch with this friend after, over the years. So from the age of 11 or 12 until 30, when I met this Christian neighbor of mine, it was just not ever present in my life. But I had that experience, and I made that commitment back when I was very young. And it wasn't until when I was 30 that I kind of really remembered that, and it's brought all these memories. So yeah, it was really
super interesting, because what you're saying there, look, you and I have such different
the
stories,
opposite.
but they have those points in which they connect, and I think this might be another one of them. Because did you remember this at all, or did this even come to your mind in between 11 and 30? You're saying no, right? This
I
was
don't think
just
so. Yeah.
out of mind. And I share with people, like I shared this in other episodes, where when I was 14, that I became an atheist for the first time, because this happened 2 times to me. Like and that those graph, it goes a little bit up. There's a local maximum or minima, however you want to orient the graph. And then after that, I found something that didn't quite fit my mental model, right like when I was 16, 17. So I went into another exploration until I was 20, which I've done studied a bunch of stuff, and that in itself it's a whole episode. But then after that fell short, I went 3 times more atheist than I was before, right? Because
Dear.
I've given this a chance. I've given this a chance. There's nothing here, right? Just to move on. But I remember when I was 14, I was sitting down in this bus stop, and I was having this conflict within me that everything seemed like atheism seemed real, in the sense that turns out that churches are institutions of power, and doesn't seem there is a God. And I was learning evolution at school, and you learn physics and you learn chemistry, and everything seems very mechanical. There's no space for anything supernatural. And religion seems to be just a human power grab, the usual, the thing that man, we created God instead of God created us, right? For whatever psychological reason. So that is what seemed true to me at the time, and I was very confused, because in my 14-year-old mind, so you will forgive the 14-year-oldness of that. I was like, what if this is a trick played by Satan just to stray me away from the path, right? So in my mental model, it was it seems like God is not real, but this is exactly what Satan would do.
That's your Pascal wager there.
Yeah, exactly. In a Pascal wager kind of sense, right? Pretty much. So I was faced with this Pascal wager, and I kept thinking about it, and for me, it was this thing that, look, I can't resolve this question. When you think about it philosophically, you can't really resolve this question. Like Descartes, I did not know at the time, but this was one of the things that Descartes wrote a lot about in his work. I mean, what if the whole world, because this sounds stupid, but like if you adopt a Cartesian vision, which again I had not read at the time, but it could be that your entire world is created by this evil demon, just to
Right, right.
everything that comes through your senses is filtered by that. So it's not a naive kind of thing. It's that the world is clearly that, but like the devil is putting here. No, it could be that your entire world that you see is created by the devil. Choose to lead you away from God. And then my conclusion, maybe I should have read the card at that time. I read it much later, but like my conclusion was that it's impossible for me to resolve this. It's just not possible.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I came from this religious, quote unquote, community, which again, I don't think it was, they would call themselves religious, but be it as it may. I remember that I just told God, look, it doesn't seem like you're real, but maybe you are, and maybe that's just the devil playing a trick on me. But I have to make a decision here, right? And that's it. I can't keep living like this. So I'm making my decision. And if I'm wrong, one day, please bring me back. So I said those words, and then at that moment, I was an atheist. But then it's not that I thought about it. I completely forgot about it until much later, right? And then those things just come back to your mind as you know.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I think it's like this eternal thing where we're sitting in heaven just having a laugh over
At
like
your
all the
old
times.
selves. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's like, and I can't remember the details now, but I remember almost making a similar kind of wager of, okay, I'm just going to go with this and, see what happens. But there was like that branch point where I was communing with someone to say, okay, I'm going to go with this. And yeah, there's a lot to be said about our our self-will and our, like if the goal, he's after our hearts, like our souls, and he knows, and potentially we know, if we're sitting beside him in heaven looking back, like this kind of like we're in eternity, we are eternal with him, but we're just in this experience here. But from eternity looking back at ourselves, like we only at that point can we kind of see like how close did we come to not serving him, and what did it really take to work that rebellion out of us? Because I know it's taken a lot to work it out of me, and he's still working it out of me. But it comes back to that fruit. Like it's if he's working in your heart, then it'll show. Like there'll be fruit from that, and that's something where we then you can go to the Bible for guidance on what what do you seek, how do you kind of grow in his love. But it all comes to centering Jesus in your understanding of who you are. And there's a lot there that I'm still trying to figure out myself. But I'm for me, it comes down to this obedience. Like if I've understood, if I've perceived, if I've kind of received something from him, then it's on me to obey it and walk in that knowledge that he's given me. And then he'll give me more. And I've kind of seen that time over time.
Now, that closes the parenthesis again, because I got really, man, when you mentioned that you had a story at 11 years old, I was like, is it gonna be a good line? And it was such a great
Good.
thing. But like we were talking about physics and right, and how can you look at the world, and by the way, just in a completely non-judgmental way, with the knowledge that you do have, are you a young Earth creationist or an old Earth creationist, or a deist? Like the deist position is essentially like God just doesn't interfere in this process, just created the universe.
No, I don't. I wouldn't be that. No.
Yeah.
Oh no, I certainly wouldn't be that. I would. I mean, it kind of feels silly to me to not be a old Earth creationist,
Yeah. Well, some
but
people are. Some people are. Some people
oh, I
like
know,
me
I
are.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
like and like I just I struggle sometimes with like some of the things you'd hear of like dinosaurs on Earth at the same time as man and like that kind of stuff. I don't know if the scientific record supports that or if it's an interpretation. Like what I like is when you throw the hardest science you got at it and it still matches what the word of God says. And that's typically what I would expect. But when it comes to the earth, like it's in the book of Genesis, the word yom for ages, like each day has different variability to what it means. And it was the Lord that just spoke it into existence. So in a sense, I'm like kind of both at the same time, which, and maybe that's not a position, but it's like um, the like I'm going to lack the words to describe it, but like the natural processes would certainly support an old Earth, and that
Yeah.
like the sun, and there's such cool things linked to that, like the age of the sun. If it was just made out of coal, it would have burnt out by now. Like the fact that it's still burning is its own miraculous kind of inefficiency, and how inefficient it is burning, and then the photons from that sun, will travel to the Earth and then are processed by flowers and plants using quantum computers to like just the physics of how the photon is caught by through photosynthesis is a mechanical model wouldn't capture the level of efficiency needed, that they're actually somehow like aligning through like a quantum computation to like figure out what the vibration of the, like it's stuff again outside my realm, but
Your
there's
expertise.
such
Yeah.
a,
Totally understood.
but it's just so cool like what the how the natural world works. So I wouldn't want to kind of fit it into, well, it says, or the interpretation says it's 6,000 years old. It must be, but it could be like, it could be breathed into existence in this living state. I don't really dwell
But the
over those kind
evidence,
of things.
but the evidence is pretty overwhelming that it's not, right. Just the way when you look
But
around and just
maybe that's the kind of point I was trying to make there of,
yeah.
if he breathed it into existence, he could have breathed it into existence as though it had been forming all this time. Like just
Yeah.
like that's his flow, that's his vibe. Like, so I just, to me, I don't really, the scientific measure that I would say to say, well, it can't be 6,000 years old, kind of
But
doesn't prevail.
don't you have to abandon science at this point? Because like this, first of all,
Exactly. Yeah.
this
Yeah.
seems to me exactly like my inner monologue about the devil, right? Just how can you tell?
Right.
So
Right.
you can't
Yeah.
tell, right? Just if God breathed the word such as like 6,000 years old, but it looks like it's 14 billion old, how can you tell? Like you can't tell. So at this point, like and I think there's a lot of this religion versus science debate comes down to this. I mean, just that there are some people who insist that yes, it's 6,000 years old because the Bible says so, and then science is wrong because science is anti-God, and like this is completely stupid. I'm
Yeah.
pardon my
Yeah.
French, right? Because like I don't see. In fact, I had an argument with like 10 years, more than 10 years ago, with a friend of mine that was very anti-evolution. And I was a atheist at that point. I was trying to be charitable to my friend, and I said, "Look, man, let me tell you, not to tell you what to do, but let me tell you the position that you should adopt. The position that you should adopt is that God directed the process of evolution, because the fact that the
Easy. Yeah.
process of evolution happened is so overwhelming by now, right? That anything that you deviate from that is it just feels stupid. I mean, it feels really stupid because like you look at the evidence and the evidence just does not point at the direction. Now, today, I think there are a lot of questions at the fringes of evolution that the same way there were questions at the fringes of Newtonian science in the beginning of the 20th century that may show us that the process of evolution is actually a lot more complex than we thought and may have details that we did not thought possible. One of my favorite ones, and those things feel so ancient sometimes, and like it feels like settled science. But when you think about it, they're so new, right? When Darwin came up with the theory of evolution, he did not know about DNA. The idea, the model that they had was just the cell was this extremely simple blob of water, and this joins like the DNA molecule just wasn't a part of the conversation because it wasn't known until much later, until very recently actually, until like the later, like I don't recall the exact year, but this is late 20th century, right? We did not know about DNA until quite late. Now that we know about DNA, there's a new question, which is how that molecule came to be, right? Just that we just don't know. And it sounds like as complex as many other things. And then there are theories here and there. So look, there is still a defensible position. I don't think anybody should adopt this position, by the way, but there is still a defensible position that God just puts the DNA molecule there. Again, I wouldn't recommend people go there, but this is at least defensible because we don't know. But once that molecule is there, man, the process of evolution is pretty clear. Like it's just, it's fairly well understood. And the other thing that I love that was actually very instrumental in my process of accepting religion is there's this whole thing about the universe being 6,000 years old, and which is again completely stupid. And you know, I'm not afraid of being spicy on that, but like because it does feel quite stupid, but like so there's this process of like this debate of the earth is 6,000 years old, and then you look at science like no it's not, because it's fairly clear that the Big Bang happened 14 billion years ago. Like it's fairly clear and undisputable. But if you look in the around 1960s, it wasn't like that at all. The religious position was that the universe came to be, and the science consensus was that the universe was eternal.
Right.
And this Catholic priest comes with this theory that people called the Big Bang theory to mock the guy, or that he believes that the universe came to be in a Big Bang, right? And turns out much later Hubble finds a lot of evidence for that theory,
yep.
and now you see how those things flip, and they flip as early as like the 1960s, the 1970s. I don't think it was until the 1980s that the Big Bang theory was widely accepted as like a scientific fact, and very few people know about it because we grow up learning about it, and it feels like this is the default position forever. Again, it isn't, and you know, just the go read about it. The consensus at the time was that the universe is eternal, and it felt ridiculous to believe that the universe came to be. If people were very against the Big Bang theory because it gave ammunition to the religious groups. But then science did what it does, which is like look at the evidence, look at the data when presented in a repeatable and reproducible way, and turns out there is overwhelming evidence that the universe is not, in fact, eternal, right? Just that it came to be, and we know this very well today. Did you know that?
Parts of that, I didn't realize how recent that knowledge
This is
shifted.
the part that nobody realizes, and you know, I was alive, I was being born, and people still, that was the last fringes of the debate were dying out. I was born in 1982, so you had still people at the time debate, like
sure.
The mainstream was settled already by the 70s, but like in the 80s, like you still had some people debating, is this true or not? And you know, it is a fact today. This is so interesting, but like you claim that this is not your area of expertise, but I suppose history is, right? So when you look at things like the Book of Jonah and the Book of Job, how do you square those things? Do you believe those things are historical? Do you believe that it doesn't matter? Do you believe what's your thinking on those books?
I would see them as historical.
You think
now,
the Book of Jonah is historical?
Well, you mean in terms of did he get swallowed up by a big
Yes.
fish like that. Yeah. Um, because of everything else I've experienced, I wouldn't question that. Um, I I do think there's a place for allegory and kind of creative descriptive license that'll be
Mm-hmm.
used all throughout the Bible. Um, but for big things like this, like it describes, I don't know how you could take that story and be like, okay, well, the whale wasn't really there, but everything else happened, um, because like you had the storm, you had now maybe it was he just got knocked overboard, and then how who knows how he got to the shore. Uh, was it this big whale? I don't spend a lot of time dwelling on those kind of things, but for Job, that's I think one of the oldest stories. Like that was seen as one of the oldest books, and um, the identity of like where he is, like in terms of like what people group he was from and so forth. Like it was, um, I don't know what the current research would say, but it was like he's very ancient, and I kind of take those things as probably in the same kind of premise that if God could breathe the world into existence, then these things could happen. Like I don't really, um, I don't know. Because I've experienced so much of the miraculous, I just don't blink an eye at that kind of stuff. But is it in if I can flip the question back to you, like when you read those, what are you filling in when there's a
I think
passage
they're
of hey, this whale?
I think they're completely made up.
Sure.
And the thing is that again, I'm still a Christian. I don't, but I see the way I see this, and you're the first person that asks me this question, flipping back to me, because usually
Oh, good.
like I'm in the host, which is
I
great,
know
by
it's
the
your
way. Just
show.
yeah, yeah. I'm always trying to put everybody on a tough spot, right? But like you guys are like, yeah, what you go to the tough spot now. But the way the way I see this is that if we were compiling like that, I see the Old Testament as like history as we know today was not a thing until fairly close to Jesus' time, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
go look at the history of history, like the first Greek people, and it does come from Greece. That as far
Well,
as
it'd
I
be all
remember,
story.
yeah, like the first people who are writing history and saying this is an account of the way we understand history to be today are fairly close to the time of Jesus, maybe the 2nd century BC, the 3rd century
Mm.
BC. I forgot the names, but I had an obsession with that at some point as well. But before that, you didn't really have history the way we understand it today, right? So
Sure.
the way I like to explain this is that is the book of Genesis historical? Certainly not in the way we understand history today, because like there was nobody there to write it down, right? So it can't be historical in the sense that we understand it today. There was an
Mm-hmm.
eyewitness, there are archaeological evidence, like we can trace those occurrences in time. It is a different thing. It's like God telling us through revelation how those things
Mm-hmm.
took place, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
not history, at least not in the way we understand history today. So there was when you look at the book of Exodus and others, what you see is oral tradition. Like this,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
history, but it's oral tradition from which is again, I want to make the distinction because modern history is very different. But oral tradition is still based in history, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at the book of Psalms, there is just no claim of any historical thing in here. It's just like a bunch of songs
Like
on
journal.
how
Yeah.
King David glorified the Lord. So that's fine. So when I look at the Bible, I look at various genres, and think each book is a different genre, and then everything has to be understood in its genre. And if we were compiling, so by and large, the Old Testament is essentially the wisdom of the Jewish people, right? The things that I consider to be true. And if I were compiling a secular wisdom of our society, I may feel compelled to include the Lord of the Rings
Sure.
but it doesn't mean that the Lord of the Rings is a real story. It just means that it talks to your, that over time, people, many people over history, uh, in an evolutionary sense, like this story kept being passed along, or I might include the Snow White or whatever, because, uh, or the fables of Aesop, right? Because over time, lots of people find enough wisdom in that book to say that, hey, this is a part of our character. Like we act as those characters. Like we like to see ourselves in the place of Aragorn, because for some reason, like this character speaks to us and it tells you something true about your psychological nature. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any, like if you tell me tomorrow that the book of Exodus, like there is archaeological evidence against it, I think this is a big problem, because I consider that
Yeah, I'd agree.
oral tradition, which means it
Mm-hmm.
may be exaggerated, but it's still oral tradition. If you tell me that the book of Jonah is completely made up, I have no problem with that, because I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that is the genre that is trying to portray, and I don't think there is any. I don't think there's a clearer way for the author to tell you that than the guy got swallowed by a whale and stayed 3 days in the belly of the fish. Because I mean, it's so clearly absurd, right? That it kind of tells you that the genre there is not history in the old
Mm-hmm.
sense of the word, or in the modern sense of the word, because that doesn't exist yet. But it's allegory. So the New Testament is already completely different. Which, by the way, a lot of people ask, a lot of atheists ask yourself, if Jesus is so important, why is it that he didn't come before? And the answer is pretty clear. Like he could not have come until history was established,
Mm-hmm.
because it is
Yeah.
important, I think, for Christianity that Jesus is a real person. And
Mm-hmm.
and oral tradition is not enough for us
No,
to have
no.
faith in this real person, right? So now you have history. Now it's a completely different story. Like now people are writing it down, and we can look at history and understand, as I understood, that people who die tend to stay dead, but through
Mm-hmm.
history you find one exception, and then this exception becomes quite important, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm similar in the sense of what the implications are, whether it's a real account or not. I think it's I like what your abstraction to say. It's the wisdom that we're gleaning out of it. So the play by play of in a historic way is doesn't take away from the wisdom. I think
But you
that's
do you
entirely
agree
fair.
with me that do you agree with me that the historical authenticity of the New Testament is important? Wisdom is not enough there. That's
Oh,
my
oh,
position at least.
hugely, but
Yeah.
yeah, but also even the like I agreed with you in saying the evidence of the Exodus is important. Like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the oral history tradition is very important. Yeah,
Awesome. What is your favorite book in the Bible?
I really like Job.
Hmm. Me too, man.
I
Again, and I was
yeah,
bashing the book as like non-historical, but it doesn't mean I don't like it. I like the Lord of the
yeah.
Rings as well, and it's not historical. It's just
But I just love the like what he goes through, but also just the its context within with the friends and just all the naysayers and everything. But another one for me is the story of Noah. Like that's something that's really
hmm
kind of close to my heart. Like I just feel like that's kind of a similar assignment that I've got, and it's just um, it's a lonely
what
thing. Like just
what in the story of Noah? Because Noah is another one that, and honestly, I don't know what to say about that one, because that's another one that the atheists
it's
will
it
always bash. Because
yeah,
like, how could you have put the animals in the ark? And again, it doesn't
yeah,
seem to me that he actually literally put the animals in the ark, because that sounds quite impossible, right? Just
yeah. That's another one I sort of faith it. But the it's not just the animals. Like it's a boat made of gopher wood. Like it's
hmm
mud and gopher wood. Like how does that hold together? Um, so for me, I don't have trouble with the miraculous just because I've experienced it, and I just that doubt is kind of worked out of me. But the part that really resonates with me is here's this guy that sort of downloaded this schematics, like kind of given this vision of something very important that he'd need to do, and then he obeys, like he's
Yeah.
obedient for so long to see it through, where everyone around him would just be, ridiculing him. But then also later in life, um, he still struggles. Like he's sort of not a perfect person, but that,
Hmm.
he served and, did what he was asked to. Like that really kind of resonates with me.
The thing I love about the story of Noah is that, for the same thing we were talking about the Big Bang and etc. If you rewind back 20 years, which is, I think a lot of developers today on Twitter are not 20 years old, they're like 20 something, right? But I'm old enough that I can rewind 20 years into the past. And I remember when the very idea of a global flood was ridiculous.
Hmm.
People would say like that's when the story died, right? Just that the very idea of a global flood is ridiculous. And
Mm-hmm.
likely what happened is that, just that there was this, it rained too much for a week, and like there was some flood, there was some local flood, and those stories come out of that. But today there's overwhelming evidence that, I mean, there are flood stories in so
Huh.
many places of the world. There are flood stories in North America that we didn't quite know about before. There are flood stories in
Oh,
Indonesia.
interesting.
There are flood stories all over the place. And then there's also a lot of scientific evidence with the Younger Dryas. Uh, and people dispute what caused this. It could have been a meteor, could have been something else. And there are all sorts of but as far as I understand, like the cause of that is still very disputed,
Hmm.
but very likely that was a global flood,
Cool.
and which again does not mean that means that there
It
was
was
an ark
filled
with
with
the animal
all your animals and
with
everything.
all your animals. But again, it's not impossible that this ark was filled with some animals.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course when you're describing the story through oral tradition, it becomes all animals. And like the thing about oral tradition is that it grows and it gets exaggerated because you
Mm-hmm.
don't have exactly the things that keeps you honest, which is the record, right? The record is what when you write something down in your diary, 20 years later, you remember a exaggerated version of that, but then you go back to
Mm-hmm.
your diary and say, oh, that's what really happened. So you didn't have that. So I understand that the story does get exaggerated, but that was a global flood. And this is like scientific evidence that 20 years ago
Mm-hmm.
sounded ridiculous as well.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Okay. Have you ever heard of the Younger Dryers?
No, I don't think I'd heard that.
So 12,000 years ago, there was a global flood, and again, you can tell this by the geological record, and there was a very sudden rise in temperature on the planet,
Huh.
which causes a global flood, and then later, around 1,000 years later, there is a very sudden drop in temperature, which causes the ice age, and then the question is what caused this, which one of the theories that goes around is just a meteor impact. So again, this is theoretical. This is not proven. But imagine and there is no evidence for this crater anything. So what people posit, the people who
Mm-hmm.
defend this theory, is that this probably happened north in Canada, in a place that today is completely
Covered
under
with
ice,
ice.
so
Yeah.
so you wouldn't see, or in Greenland, or like close to the North Pole. But there is an impact that is strong enough that essentially floods the Earth with very few. And it's not, fairness. I mean, we know that it's likely not the way it's described in the Bible to begin with. I mean, it's not the whole Earth, with the exception of one mountain, but is a flood that is global enough that is described in mythologies from many places around the world that have
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with each other, right? But you have this story about the flood, and the
Hmm.
evidence in the Younger Dryas is that it was pretty widespread. I mean, it's not that everybody would have died. I mean, you have room there for a bunch of people to survive, but probably like in North America, you see like a lot of animals just dying and going extinct because the whole thing flooded. Right?
Huh. That's wild.
Awesome, Aiden. What would you like our viewers to know about you that we haven't discussed yet?
Oh, I guess I'm more concerned about what they know. Like if like things like having peace, you know, like, or just knowing the Lord in a way that you can trust him, that he can, you know, speak into your life and, you know, bring restoration where you need it. And, you know, I guess just in terms of testimony, I won't ramble on of all the things he's done for me, but, you know, he's real, and he's done great things for me. So anyone that's kind of struggling and, you know, maybe listens to what we're saying and just kind of, you know, laughs it off, or just doesn't have that kind of experience, you know, like if something's speaking to your heart, reach out, because, you know, I'd love to share more of what he's done for me and some of the crazy, dangerous situations he's kind of pulled me out of, and just to, you know, to express to others that is available, you know, to you. Like it's, he's a loving God, and we need him. I need him badly in so many different ways, and I needed him, you know, through so many situations, and he's really been there. So just for those that are, don't have that kind of hard experience of who God is, you know, that's kind of a care I'd have, that just to say that, you know, lean into that, because there's something there to connect with. And, you know, I'm always open for anyone that wants to chat about that kind of stuff.
That's great. Then people who want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
Probably on X.
X.
That's easy. I'm on LinkedIn as well. My name's in the, At Risk Media
Yeah.
is on X, and my
At
name is on.
Risk Media, right? So on X
Yeah.
or At Risk Media, the handle is going to be in the description. Adon, it was an absolute pleasure to connect with
Yeah,
you.
this
We've
was
been
fun.
chatting on a professional setting for a while now, and it was great for you to outreach and you know,
To
present
confirm my
yourself as a
love for
potential
Terso.
guest, yeah, and for Christ, like the two most important things in my
Amen.
life at the moment. So, like, just will and. I don't know for how long Torso is going to be one of the most important things in my life. Like I always have this sense in which, like, I like to look into the future and say, I don't hope my investors don't hear this, but in 150 billion years, I don't think Torso will matter.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and I like to use like this ridiculous timeline to say that, like, there is something eternal here that we're talking about that I think matters a
Yeah.
lot more.
Amen.
And not to say that, of course, my job is not important, but we're so tiny, and like when you put things into perspective, I said in 150 billion years, will that matter? Probably not. But this other thing will. So. All right, Adon, thank you so much. It was an absolute blast having you.
Amen. You take care.